Welcome back to the Imperfectionist Podcast. My name is David Rendell, and once again, we have a special guest, Stosh Walsh. It's his second time on the podcast, and we've only done 5. So this is me gradually. It's like common law marriage. If you live with someone too long, you're married to them as far as the government's concerned. What we're going to do is
Too
have
long.
Stosh on the podcast so many times that he's the co-host, even though he didn't sign up for it. I do want to start. This is the Imperfectionist Podcast, and um, I, I do want to start with something funny that happened from the last time you were on, Stosh. Somebody got on Facebook. I mentioned this in the previous episode, but since you're back, I'll tell you directly. So somebody said, "Hey, that guy was really interesting, Stosh, but you never said his last name. So if you could say his last name, give me his last name. I'd like to look him up." So I said, "Oh, I'm sorry that I messed that up," and I sent him a link to your podcast. The Insubordinate Podcast. I sent them a list to Constant Organizational Development, your website, and they were like, "Oh, thank you so much." So then I get on the recording, and 16 seconds in, Stosh, I go,
Said my last
"Hey,
name.
please welcome Stosh." And I said it like I was a teacher teaching phonics. I said, "Please welcome Stosh Walsh," because it's a lot, Stosh and Walsh. Like you
Yeah,
gotta, if you don't do it, you're gonna.
that's why I
So
only need one name.
so I said Stosh Walsh like that. And then um, at the end of the podcast, so then yesterday I was listening to all of them all the way through because I want to not repeat stuff. And I just also want to see what it sounds like. And I was out for a walk and listening to all the episodes. And at the end, I go, Stoshwalsh. Like I spelled your name because I knew
That's
Stosh.
funny.
People might have no idea. Like, is it Stawsh or like, I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
so I assumed that maybe, so I even spelled both names and someone was like, hmm. So one of the things I've asked people to do, it's the Imperfectionist Podcast, is like, let me know if something's wrong. Like, hey, your lighting was weird, or hey, like today they could say, I don't like the light on your glasses. It's distracting. We're working on that. Whatever it happens to be. And so somebody was like, yeah, you didn't say his last name. And then I checked it and I spelled it slowly and
Yeah.
pronounced it deeply. So anyway, they were interested enough in you, Stosh, to at least want to know your last name. So let's
Well,
be real
yeah.
clear. Stosh Walsh.
Yeah. Thanks for that, whoever you are out there. And if you're interested, I'm easy to find.
Yeah, just you don't even that was part of the point too. I think that's where they might have got stuck. You said I don't really need a last name or you don't really need
Yeah.
to know my last name, but it was like we had already though communicated it by that point.
Right.
We had
Right.
already said what it was.
I think that I need to make that my goal. I need to make it my goal that if you just put Stosh in a Google search, that I'm one of the on the first page. I've never
Yeah,
tried that, so I don't think I am. If you put my full
do
name in
it.
there's pages and pages of stuff. But
Yeah, yeah. If you put my name in there, they think it's all me and it's all my pictures and all my books and all my speaking and all my websites. But it's the birth date of a 75-year-old opera singer who was born in England.
oh wow.
Um, and so it looks like I'm 75 years old and live in England because somehow they mixed that. And it is a David Rendell. It's another guy named David Rendell.
Yeah.
Um, so, all right. So we always start with a quote of the week. We start with a book of the week. Although, normally we start with a question. So you're the one with the question for this week is what is Stosh's last name? You're the one with the quote in the book. What's a good question to ask people to get them thinking about what we want them to think about this week? What's a question for the people out there?
A question for the people out there is, are people the same? We talked about this a little bit last time, but are people the same whether they're at home or work or anywhere else?
Yeah. So that's a great question. Stash and I, we do a lot with assessments, and I know when I give people assessments, they they go, "Oh, do you want my home personality or my work personality?" And so what we're asking today is, do you think you're the same person um, at work and at home, or are you different in some way?
Well, and even
At
do you
work and
think
home.
other people are the same or different, right? Because I think that's what leads to some of the organizational behavior that dehumanizes people.
Mm. Talk a
and
little bit
weakness
more
and
about that. What
weakness
do you mean?
fixing. Well, so I think, and we talked a little bit about this before, and it's weird, like, because when you and I have conversations, I always forget like what we've talked about in a recording or on air somehow, or just in our like
Oh,
interactions
because
over
we've been
time.
talking to each other for the last 30 years. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So I think the for me the this whole business of am I different when I'm at work versus someplace else, one thing is my own identity in that, and how much of that do I internalize or accept, or whatever. And I think it's dangerous for some people, because what that can mean is that I am willing to do things in my work life that I'm not willing to do in my home life. So I
Mm.
have worse boundaries at work than I do at
Mm.
home, and I'm being
Yeah.
asked to do things, whatever that is, right? I mean, and I'm not going to sit here and say like that once in a while you shouldn't stay longer to complete something, or like as soon as you get to 40 hours you should stop working, or what, like that. That's not what I mean. But what I do mean, though, is like, are you willing to tolerate bad behavior on the part of an organization, or on the part of your boss, or on the part of a coworker, because it's work, right?
Mm.
Instead of, hey, you know what? That's not the kind of thing that I would enjoy if I was in my home life, or my home personality wouldn't allow for something like that. So just because we're at work doesn't mean we're different. And that notion of the potential dehumanization of that, and weakness fixing, like we talked about weakness fixing for most of the time that we were on the last time, but that to me is an outpouring of, or an overflow of, the dehumanization of people in the workplace. Because the Industrial Revolution said, let's do things better, let's do things faster, let's do things more efficiently. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I mean, Six Sigma and lean thinking, all of the things that have exponentially improved our ability to output things that we're making. However, that is not a good strategy for people, because people
Right.
aren't things.
Right.
People are people. And, Peter Drucker, arguably, in my mind, not arguably, the greatest management thinker of the 20th century, they're not employees, they're people. It's probably
Right.
his most famous quote. It's the one I like the best. And that whole notion of even the way we refer to people in the workplace, like that's one of the reasons why I call my podcast Insubordinate, because we actually refer to people as subordinates. My
Mm.
subordinate. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Subordinate? Are you serious?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, and maybe it's just me, but I think words matter. I think labels matter. I think the way we posture ourselves toward people in workplaces and other arenas matter. I think the way we set that up dictates how we interact. I think it dictates the kind of relationships, the kinds of benefits we provide. I think it dictates the relative culture of the organization, and I think it also dictates the value that we place on individuals. And even more enlightened terms like human capital, for example, or something like that, still kind of quantifies humanity in weird ways. And I'm all for measurement. I'm all for performance. But when we start talking about it in ways that start to dehumanize people and start to put numbers on people, like we would be thinking about it in terms of the number of widgets we produce, not interested.
How does that tie together, the dehumanization and the weakness fixing? Connect those two together for me. And when you talk about like what are you willing to accept at work or something like that, are you saying that if somebody asked me to change, because I think it happens at home too, somebody says, hey, don't be like that, or don't treat me
Yeah,
this way, or stop being so detail oriented, or
yeah.
whatever. Are you saying that sometimes we accept kind of feedback or criticism or something at work that we allow it to affect us in ways? Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, that's one aspect of it for sure. I think the main one for me is that the weakness fixing thing dehumanizes people because we don't think as much about the consequences of what that looks like. And we alluded to this last time we talked about weakness fixing, that there are serious mental and physical consequences for being in the bad fit in
Yeah.
terms of your job, in terms of your career. Um, the statement that we always used to make when I was at Gallup was something like, if you having a bad boss would increase your risk of stroke by like 66%.
Right.
And so, but that bad boss thing like that's just a general comment, but bad bosses have certain characteristics because we've done a ton of research on this. So bad bosses do things like focus on your weaknesses instead of your strengths. Bad
Right.
bosses don't give people good feedback. Bad bosses are dictatorial, like all the different things, the kinds of things that you would never, ever put up with, at least if you're a healthy person in your real life. And
Yeah.
so if you have a friend who acts like that, that person's probably not your friend anymore. If you have a parent who acts like that, then you go to a counselor and try to solve that problem or fix that problem. Same thing if spouse, right? Those kinds of things. And so we go to work and we tolerate those kinds of behaviors and we accept those things as normal because somehow we've believed that me fixing myself in this environment is the way to go. And me fixing myself in this environment is okay. And so therefore it's okay for someone to point out those flaws as though there's something inherently wrong with me and not just a behavior that I either need to consider modifying or say, hey, this is not a great fit for me, so I'm going to go do something else where this behavior or this thinking pattern or this way of feeling is actually going to be valued. And so the dehumanization of the weakness fixing, to me, it's more about the experience that we have at work and the fact that organizations have taken on this identity of we sort of own you, and the social contract of work has deteriorated in that sense, where it's not really about making meaning and having a mission. It's more about efficiency, and it's more about things than it is about people. And so when we start trying to do the same things with people that we did with things, something breaks down in that. And all of those things are great for things. Manufacturing things and being efficient in those ways and eliminating scrap and variability and being able to produce more, those things are wonderful. Those are scientific advancements that took a long time to realize, and doing that in ways that are more safe and healthier for the environment and like all of those kinds of things. Wonderful, wonderful advances in terms of how we do things. Not the same with people, though, because it's actually the opposite. The opposite is true with people. The more freedom, the more autonomy, the more focus on their strengths, the more flexibility, the more value, the more recognition, the better people are going to be. Not the more narrow you can define them, not how can we get everybody to do this the exact same way. And that's one of the massive, we talked about myths of weakness fixing last time. That's one of the massive myths of weakness fixing. Like the best in every single role all get there the exact same way. So now we're going to prescribe, this is exactly how you do it. Like it's not an algebra problem. It's not math. It's not governed by the same rules. So it's about productivity. It's about measurement. It's about making sure that we're successful in our organization. Okay, great. I fully subscribe to that. Let your best minds, let your awesome people figure out the awesome ways to do it, and quit telling them exactly what to do all the time and quit dictating to them as though they're products instead of people. And you will see massive improvements and massive innovations and massive success in ways that you probably never dreamt possible. So we're settling in so many ways because we've focused on this and because we treated people like they're ours or their assets, and it's really not the case at all.
So it sounds like what you're saying is people took this, management, businesses took the same approach towards people as they did with machines, and basically thought they're interchangeable. And that mindset, even like you said, human resources. I got desks, I got computers, I got machines, and I've got people, and I'm going to manage them somewhat similarly. That philosophy then drives certain kinds of behaviors. If this machine is broken, I'm going to fix it. If this machine doesn't do what I want it to do, I'm going to get rid of it and get another one that does. And then we apply that to people and it doesn't work, but we don't understand that it's because the philosophy is fundamentally flawed. Say the quote from Drucker again, because I think that's worth repeating because it's so short. Say that quote again.
They're not employees, they're people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things to me, and I've said that in every management conference I've ever spoken at. I've said that in every management development seminar I've ever led, because it to me, it just encapsulates it in such a cogent way that and it's not that we were ill-intended in terms of this development, but the flip side of that, though, Dave, and this is the part of it that I always say to people who are managing others, this idea that getting somebody into a different position, even if it's outside your company, sometimes is the best thing, not only for that individual, but also for your company. So rather than beat your head against the wall so many times because you've been trying to get this person to do the thing that you want them to do, and they're not conforming, or they're not fitting in, or they're not doing it the way that you want them to do, or whatever it is. I mean, that's part of that could be the problem with your model and the way that you're trying to go about achieving success. Yes, examine that, try to figure that out, do some reflection on that as an organization or as a department or as an individual manager, but also sometimes just allowing that person to go, making it free to say, hey, you know what? This doesn't seem like it's working. Is there another area of the organization that seems like it would be more of a fit for you, or there would be better flourishing associated with that? And I know you talk about that in the Freak Factor. We talk about it all the time, but there's so much hesitance to do that in organizations, in my experience. It's like we've failed if we can't get this person to do the job that we hired them to do. Instead of going, you know what? We know this person's talented. We know this person is a good person. They're not doing anything evil. So how can we be more conversational? How can we be more human about how we approach this topic, this issue? The fact that for some reason, this person's not performing or doesn't feel good about what they're doing in their job. And so that conversation can evolve into, hey, maybe it's not this, but it could be that. And that also exists here in our organization. So why don't we give that a shot? Why don't we try that? Why don't we move you? Why don't we just give you the opportunity to do that differently? And or better yet, what do you think? Because most performance management in most organizations starts with the expectation of the organization. And that's a necessity. There has to be expectation setting. I'm not against that. But we almost never ask people questions about, what would you like to be doing? What are your best ideas for how we could produce well here? What are your best ideas for how we could move forward, or how we could innovate, or what our future might look like? And we use taglines about treating people like owners, but nothing in our processes reflects that at all.
Well, I think one of the things you said was, we know they're not bad, we know they're not evil, we know they're talented. I actually think that's where part of the problem starts sometimes, is I think we do think people are evil sometimes, or we wonder if they're talented or not, because we see their lack of ability to do it the way we want it done, or do exactly what we want, or do it as quickly as we want, to meet our preference, or whatever it happens to be. We see the lack of fit as not a lack of fit, but as a failure of the person. And if they were a good person, they could fit themselves in. And if they were a good person, they could figure it out. If they were talented, they could learn and develop the new ability. So I actually think that's part of where it starts is, and that's the whole Freak Factor idea. We see we see the weakness, we miss the corresponding strength, but also when they don't have it the way we want it, we see weirdness as weakness. We see, the fact that the person doesn't have what we want them to have, or doesn't do it the way we want them to do it, as a failure, right? And that's not a good person. That's not a good employee. That person doesn't have potential, because that's what we do in school. Oh, we talked about this last time. You hold your pencil the wrong way, you're probably never going to go to college. You don't read well, you're probably never going to go to college, right? You struggle in math, you're probably never going to go to college. You can't sit still in class, you're probably never going to go to college.
And that's defining college as the only way to be successful.
Well, right. Well, right? That's like also that's the other thing.
Other
right.
thing.
Right. Yeah. So, but it does lead to, and I think it's because you're being rebellious, or I think you're deliberately being a problem, or I think you're not trying hard enough. So I think maybe a good guide for what we talk about today is, last time we talked a lot about why weakness fixing doesn't work for me, right, as an individual. But it sounds like maybe that would be a little bit of a guide for today. How does attempting to fix weaknesses hurt organizations, right? Because sometimes they think, well, that's cute for people, but to your point, I need people to get stuff done. So it's not really in my best interest to do anything other than try to turn people into the kind of people I want them to be. So that's nice for you, Dave. You care about people and you want to help them be successful. In fact, somebody even said it to me once. They said, Dave, no company's going to hire you to do the Freak Factor talk, because you're basically telling everybody to leave and go find a job that fits, which is a terrible assumption. It assumes nobody's job fits, and that every company's busy trying to cram people into spots that don't fit, which is probably true to some extent, sadly enough. But also, not beneficial for companies if they're doing that, right? So let's
Yeah.
start with why is it not beneficial to a company to spend their time trying to fix people's weaknesses? What are the ways that that fails, and why does that fail?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I want to back up to something that you said a second ago, though, because I think you're right. It is both and with the assumptions that we're making about people if they're not a good fit. And part of the issue with that for me is that it assumes that something or someone in the situation has to be wrong, where it's not a right and wrong thing. Fit is not a right and wrong thing. It's not morality. It's not like you stole or you didn't, right?
Mm,
It's just, this is just an objective reality. This is not working for an individual, and it's
yeah.
not working for the organization in terms of performance. That's just an objective reality. So let's look at it as a problem to solve, as opposed to that person either needs to be wrong, which therefore makes us right. And I think that's why sometimes the organization takes that kind of posture, or manager takes that posture, because then I feel better about the fact that I didn't make a bad hire. That person is just a bad employee.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if I made a bad hire, or if that happens to me, a couple times in a row, then maybe I'm not going to get to be a manager anymore. And so now there's weird self-preserving behavior that goes associated with that, and et cetera. Right. So,
Well, not just the selection too, but also the management. I haven't managed this person. I haven't rewarded them effectively. I haven't punished them effectively. I haven't motivated them effectively.
yeah,
And that's harder to believe than I did all the right. I mean, it's kind of like being a parent, right? If something isn't going well with a child and it's frustrating, at some point, if you're trying to do your best, which is one of the reasons you'd be frustrated with that, you want to be like, it's not me, it's them. I mean, that's the
yeah,
classic sort of for anything, right?
yeah,
I'm good
absolutely.
in my marriage, I'm good as a parent, but this other person is the problem. And I think companies end up doing. I've always said that the way I teach alignment, what I say to people sometimes is we need to understand that we don't have to give up on somebody as a human being to say this just isn't a good fit. But that's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
If you believe that anybody can do anything if they wanted it bad enough and tried hard enough,
Yes.
then I have to put in that effort. And then when it doesn't work, I have to conclude that that person is a worthless human being who just doesn't want it and won't put in the effort, instead of saying that's not a possibility for that person. That wasn't a realistic expectation for that person. And this
Yeah.
just isn't the right fit for them. And they'll probably go on to massive success potentially somewhere else, but it won't be this because this just isn't a good fit for them. And again, that doesn't make them evil, and it doesn't make them untalented, and it doesn't mean they have no potential. But our current philosophy means I have to get to all of those things before I can in good conscience fire them because I did everything I could and they just,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
didn't want it bad enough. And
Well,
so I give up on them and they're worthless.
yeah. And Dave, I think what you said there is super important. Say hi to my dog, everybody. Um, it's super important because when you're talking about why it doesn't work in an organization or what gets in the way, I think some of what gets in the way is the pre-existing beliefs that exist, and the fact that it is very difficult to change organizational beliefs about people or performance, or because part of an organization's core belief has to be that you can't be anything you want to be, and that jobs aren't just interchangeable here.
Yeah.
That we have some people who are super talented to do XYZ jobs, and we have certain people who are super talented to do ABC jobs. And then if we took an ABC job person and put them into an XYZ job, they'd probably fail.
Yeah.
And that's not, but the step they have to take is that's not a value statement on that individual, and that's not a value statement on us. It's
Yeah.
just a reality. And we explore that with our people. We don't dictate that to them. Like, one of the biggest frustrations that I've always had, and one of the biggest criticisms that gets leveraged at the strengths movement is, well, you're trying to pigeonhole me. No,
Right.
there's a whole spectrum of things that you're capable of doing, and there's a whole spectrum of things that you are going to do way better than anybody else. But I'll call them, for lack of better terminology, A, B, and C.
Yeah.
And that means that it's probably not going to be X, Y, and Z. And
Right.
so
Right.
just stick to A, B, and C. There's all kinds of stuff that you can do within A, B, and C that's going to make you fulfilled and happy and make you a top performer and make you successful, and however you define that term. And
Yeah.
organizations, if they believe that also, they become much more flexible about the lines that exist between positions and between responsibilities within positions. And so they go, hey, you know what? We hired you to do this job. Say it's an administrative manager. We hired you to do this job. You're a very organized person. This makes sense for you. And so you're going to be excellent at this. However, there are one or two things in this job that you don't do particularly well. So is there another person on the team that could take that on? Or could we do a little trade in terms of some of these sub responsibilities to optimize more for you and for this other person? And it's the irony is we do this all the time in our relationships outside of work. We do this all the time in marriages. So in my marriage, I have no idea, Dave, no idea whatsoever how much our electric bill is. I have no idea how much it costs for us for our water. I don't know when those bills are due. I don't know how often they're paid. I have no idea about any of that stuff, right? And God forbid my wonderful wife passes away tomorrow because of some crazy accident or whatever. Someone is going to have to come in and run my life from a day-to-day perspective, because I don't do any of that. I don't shop for the groceries. I don't pay the regular bills, blah, 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 blah. What do? I manage our retirement. I know exactly how much more time we have to pay off our house. I know whether it's a good idea to refinance our house or not. I know whether it's a good idea to sell our stock portfolio or mutual funds or whatever or not. I manage that stuff. I'm constantly thinking about what about 5 years from now? What about 10 years from now? I'm not thinking about later today. And so that partnership has always existed in our marriage. And the more we define it, the better it gets. And the more I go, if I can take that off my plate and give that to yours, and if you can take that off your plate and give it to me, the better that's going to function. Again, in terms of performance, it preference leads to performance, but it's not the only thing. It's not just because we're trying to accommodate people and we're trying to get them all to sit around the campfire and sing Kumbaya, and it doesn't matter if we get anything done. I said this in the last episode. Performance matters. And my wife performs exceptionally in terms of those day-to-day areas. I do not. I perform exceptionally in future type areas, and she does not. And so when we work that out in our regular lives, it seems like a no-brainer. Like I tell that story and people are like, well, yeah, sure. I have the exact same thing in my, home relationship and in the relationships with my friends and that's how it works for me all the time. Like it's not uncommon. But then we go to work and all of a sudden we don't do that at all. And it makes no sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. And that's, I think, again, it's the organization that needs to take the first step and take the responsibility for that. And they have to believe that ultimately is going to lead to performance. Because if you don't have a belief that performance is important, when most organizations do have that, but if you don't have the belief that performance is important, that we should be counting something, we should be measuring something, we should be succeeding in some way that we planned to succeed in, and that moving people into spaces where they're going to have the flexibility, the autonomy, the focus on their strengths, the recognition, all the things that we know go into good management to be able to do those things, then all bets are going to be off. And we're going to keep trying to do it the same way with every single person. And then we're going to make it so that it's either me or you. And then that means it's got to be you, because if it's me, that means something's wrong with me or with our organization. And I'm not willing to take on that responsibility. And that happens over and over and over again in so many different organizations. I can't tell you how many times I've heard the story from people who say, yeah, I was in this job in this organization and it just about killed me. And then I got into this other job in this other organization. And it's really not that much different of a job. The organization just shaped it differently so that the person could be successful. And they had a different philosophy about what successful meant. And I know you could tell me a million stories about the same kind of thing. And there are stories in all kinds of books about the same kind of thing. But we have to get to a place where organizationally we say these two things are not mutually exclusive. Performance and customization on an individual level are not mutually exclusive. And weakness fixing says there's no customization. There's just the same for everybody.
Yeah, and I think they potentially drive it. Like you said, preference. I love the way you said that, and I think I'm probably going to use that because it's a nice little rhyme and they start with the same letter. Preference drives performance. I think a lot of times we think discipline drives performance or processes drive performance or
and they do for things.
Well, right. And that was another thing I was thinking about along the way. I think two of the machine kind of metaphors that hurt us when we deal with people is interchangeability, right? I don't want to customize for you because then when you leave, just like you said, if you and your wife were cross-trained and you both did a little bit of everything, then losing either one of you wouldn't have an impact on the other because We both know how to do everything. We both pay the bills. We both invest in retirement. We both handle everything together, right? Um, but so interchangeability is one, but also expendability. Oh, that machine broke. We just buy another one from the company, and now we have a new one, and we're right back in business. Um, and so when I treat people like they're expendable, I'll just get rid of you when you don't do what I want. Then why would I customize either? I got other machines that do what I want them to do. This machine isn't working, therefore it's broken. There's something wrong with it, not something wrong with my demands. What's interesting is I think you could also take that metaphor, you could still keep the machine metaphor. And if you wanted to have the philosophy we've been talking about, you could, because if you say, Dave, I want you to pound some nails in this roof, for example, all day, and I show up with a sweet drill, you go, well, Dave, that's not the right tool. And I go, well, this stupid thing's broken. And you're like,
Mm-hmm.
no, Dave, that's not the right thing. That's no, I'm going to throw it away.
Right.
Or no, if you use the it's got a great big battery on the end. If I use that side, I could really probably pound some nails with this thing. Well, it's going to
Yeah.
break. You might electrocute yourself at some point. Stosh, don't tell me what to do. I'm going to use this. So I think if you want to use the machine metaphor, that's the thing. It's figure out what that person was designed for. Are they a high powered drill? Are they an air compressed nail gun? Are they an old school hammer? Are they a crowbar? But we really don't like that, because then on the reverse side, oh, you can't talk about people as though they're not the Swiss Army knife, right? You can't talk about them as
Right.
though they're not unlimited sort of function and potential. So it's kind of this weird back and forth. But I think interchangeability and expendability are two of the biggest problems. And yet, even with the machine metaphor, we have very specific machines that do very specific things, and we don't expect that they'll do something else. I don't
Yeah.
I don't yell at my printer because it doesn't send me my emails.
Right.
I don't expect it to. I don't get upset with it because it doesn't take high quality photos of my family. Even that, like everybody's got a camera in their phone now. But you know this because you take really high quality photos, and I'm using a camera to record this podcast. If you want a really good photo or really good video, you get a really good camera, and it isn't the one in your phone. The one in your phone is fine, but whatever they could shrink down to that size, there's something way better in a full size that can do some amazing things and every time your camera phone gets a little bit better, every other camera gets a little bit better as well. And
Yeah.
so when you go see a professional camera person still on the side, a professional photographer still like on the sideline of a football game or any kind of sporting event, we're about to have the Olympics. I mean, they got a thing that looks like a Hubble telescope out. They don't have something they tuck in their pocket. So even there, nobody goes, I threw away my iPhone because the camera, wasn't up to something that I could send in as a professional photograph. And you're
Mm-hmm.
like, well, no, that's because that's not what it's for. So I do think you could still, I think sometimes we're even being unfair to the machine metaphor that we don't expect tools. But I think that's another mindset we have about people. People should be endlessly, I mean, one metaphor I've wanted to use in the past is we totally understand that different dogs have different personalities
Mm.
and that different dogs do different things. Well, some can jump really high, and some are the kind that you can use for duck hunting, and some are for protection, and some are for there's so many different things, and dogs have been bred very, very specifically. But if you get into the idea that people are somehow have a more narrow function, just like that dog might, and that you can't expect a beagle that you would use for hunting to be a canine that you use to protect an officer or to
Yeah.
attack a criminal.
Yeah.
Uh, People really start to get concerned that you have too narrow. So I almost think we have contradictory beliefs about people. We sort of believe they should be able to do just about anything. And we don't want to, like you said, pigeonhole or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And then we also, though, get upset when they can't do everything. I think we have too many too many kind of beliefs around that, I guess, as I think it
Well,
through.
yeah, I mean, and I love that, Dave, because the whole idea that the narrowness of who we are or what we're capable of is ironically the area where we can be the most effective or the most successful or the highest performer is so that's a big part of what is a barrier to accepting this whole philosophy, because everything is ingrained in our education system and our performance management systems in our organizations that say you want to be well-rounded, you want to be the Swiss Army knife, like all the things. And
Broad is
right, go
better,
broad.
general is
And
better. Yeah.
so to me, it's saying, listen, there's still a wealth of opportunity for growth, for learning, for advancement, for performance within the band of what you are the best at. And that is the part that we're not selling well enough, in my view. Like those of us who've embraced this philosophy and who want to see organizations and individuals thrive in it, the part of it that we haven't sold well enough, the part of it that we haven't evangelized well enough about it is this is what it looks like for your life. This is what it looks like for your performance. This is what it looks like in terms of your exploration, the satisfaction of your curiosity, the fulfillment of your mission, whatever that personal mission you have is, the vision that you've had for your life that you wanted to accomplish or that you want your life to look like. It can exist. All of that can exist within the boundaries of how you are wired and how you show up. And it's not to say that you're never going to change. You're never going to grow. You're never like that. That's such a misconception about the strengths movement that, oh, well, you're telling me that I'm never going to grow or that I'm never going to develop or that I'm not.
Because we think of
No, I'm not
growth as
saying that.
broadening, not as digging. Yeah, not as,
Right.
yeah.
Exactly. And it's like, so there was a quote that I read a long time ago, and I can't remember where I read this, but it was basically the idea that, that growth is about new shoots on existing branches, not growing brand new branches off the trunk of the tree.
Yeah.
And it's like that, it's like that tree is still going to be a beautiful tree. It's still going to be full and it's still going to have all the foliage that you want it to have. And like your life is still going to be amazing. It's not all it's saying is you're not the same kind of tree as your neighbor tree. Right.
Trees are like, yeah, the tree metaphor can be like the dog metaphor too.
Yeah.
What's great about an oak tree, it lives for a really long time and it has really hard wood, but it grows really slowly. What's great about a pine tree, it's really soft wood, so it's easy to work with. It grows a lot faster,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also a little less stable because it grows so tall. I mean, just on and on and on. And then again, if you say, well, some people are like oak trees and some people are like pine trees, it's like, well, I guess it's time to get some of those oak tree characteristics. Well, I guess
Yeah.
it's time. What if I was the exact right hardness of wood? What if I grew at the exact? It's like, but you're not. You're like this, or like, well,
Yeah.
the dog one I was thinking about. Not only, are dogs different, and we acknowledge that, and we basically don't try to teach certain dogs to do certain kinds of things, and we understand what certain dogs are going to be good at. And then to your point, we train, like, dogs can do some amazing things in their area, right? And they can almost do endless things, and you can keep training them really for a lifetime because of that. But we also, you can go online and basically do a personality quiz for which kind of dog is right for you.
Yeah.
We
Right.
have we have friends who have an Australian Shepherd dog, which is massively high energy, just massively. Like if you'd play fetch with her 47 hours a day, she would do it. And if you're not a high energy person, you don't want a high energy dog. But if you love to go on hikes and you love to go on walks and you love to run and you love to be active and you love to be outside, there are certain kind of dogs. But
Yeah.
we had a Bichon Frise for years. She didn't fetch, she didn't run, she didn't jump, she didn't care. And if you like to, and it is kind of my wife's style, if you like to chill and you like to relax and you're kind of easygoing, she didn't put any pressure on you to get moving.
Yeah.
If anything, you had to be like, you want to go outside? She's like, nah.
Yeah.
So even that, we recognize there can be that fit right between the person and their dog as far as what well, but we don't think I could train this Chihuahua to be a canine dog for a police officer. And we don't think we could train this German Shepherd to be comfortable in this lady's handbag as she goes to the store every day. That's not, that's a really big handbag. I have seen some handbags that big. So yeah, I think you were talking earlier about the another quote that I think goes with that Drucker one, and it was related to book. Why don't you tell us the book and then lead us
Yeah.
into the quote, which kind of goes a little deeper on they're not employees, they're people. It gets a little bit more explicit. So tell us a little bit about the book. I think it's called Widget, and tell us a little bit about that quote you were telling me about when we started.
Yeah, so I worked with a guy at Gallup called Rodd Wagner, and he co-wrote a book called 12 when he was at Gallup. And then after he left Gallup, he wrote another book, which is the book in question. It's called Widgets.
Okay.
And the quote from it that I wanted to share was, "Your people are not your greatest asset. They're not yours, and they're not assets."
Mm.
And again, it's kind of coming at it from the perspective of the organization. And the organization ultimately has to have a different perspective on this, that people do not belong to you. They're not going to, well, I shouldn't say they're not going to, because they do, but they shouldn't have to change or feel like they have to change some aspect of themselves to fit into what you want them to do or how you want them to be. Going back to your dog metaphor, right? Like it would be like saying like, okay, German Shepherd, happy you're here. Now get 50 pounds smaller, like, what do I, no, not going to happen. And so, but that notion of they don't belong to you, people aren't yours. And so therefore expectations of them have to alter accordingly.
Mm.
And so, and again, there are significant barriers to this, but part of those barriers are belief barriers. If we have organizations that don't believe that they're going to perform as well or better in treating people these ways, then they're never going to alter their behavior toward people. And if we don't have people, and this is where I think we've focused, because it's a lot easier for us to focus on what we feel like we might be able to control or to change something at an individual level versus trying to change something at a group or a corporate level, is if we don't have the expectation that I'm coming into this organization, and I'm just going to keep using the same metaphor that we've been talking about for the sake of argument. If I come into this organization as a German Shepherd and you tell me that you want me to be a Chihuahua, I'm gone. I'm out of here.
And
right?
ideally, we're doing that on the selection side, right? We're looking for a German Shepherd. We're looking.
Yeah.
I mean, my wife and I, before we chose that Bichon, she said, "Are you willing to take a quiz online with me and try to figure out what kind of dog we should get?" And I said, "Sure." And about 3.5 hours later, I was like, "How many more questions are there on this thing?" I mean, it just kept going and going and going. And yet with people, we kind of go, if they're willing to sign up for it, we can teach them to do it and it's going to be fine. And I think that's the mistake. Like you said, preference drives performance. I mean, one of the things that I've started asking audiences over and over again is, raise your hand if you have to use Excel at work, Microsoft Excel. And almost all the hands go up every single time. And we've all probably done a spreadsheet at some point. And then I said, how many does Excel, raise your hand again, if Microsoft Excel fuels your soul?
Mm-hmm.
And far less hands go up. Now at a CPA conference, a lot went up, but far less go up, right? And here's what I say. I can teach you to do Excel, but I can't teach you so that it fuels your soul. That's not a training thing. And when you said preference drives performance, I think all we can do is try to match what we need from people to their pre-existing preferences, right?
Yep.
And but we don't get to give people new ones. I'm going to teach them to want this. I'm going to teach them to like this. I'm going to give them that hunger to be a salesperson. I'm going to give them that passion for precision. No, you're not. So I think part of this, which again, I think can tie into the machine metaphor and also into the dog one, is, and a comment on this is going to be, oh, so people are like animals. And that's why we can't have these kind of discussions, right? Because we can't look at these things crossing over. But even if you want to keep the machine metaphor, I go to the store. If you really get into any activity, you discover there's more and more specific tools to get better and better at doing that particular activity, and you don't use the wrong tool, or even not the perfect tool. I think one of the quotes I used in my book, because I think one of the things people use to criticize employees or people when they want them to change is go, oh, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And what
Right.
they're doing is beating people up for trying to use the same approach in situations where it isn't appropriate. And what
Yeah.
I come back with is, if I'm a hammer, I need to start looking for nails, right? In
Yeah. Well, and if
situations
I'm
where
in,
people need some hammering, it's like, I'm a
yeah.
hammer.
And if I'm an organization,
Yeah,
I need to figure out where's a room full of nails I can put this person in. Right.
exactly.
And then say, hey,
But
you know
what we
what?
do is go, stop being a hammer. And what we
Right.
want to do is turn you into a screwdriver. Well, when you start being a screwdriver, you start looking for screws. So then
Yeah.
how have we fixed it? You still need to match them to, but I think that's what we think.
Yeah.
Let's melt this hammer down, turn it into a screwdriver, because what we need right now is screwdrivers. And then what you discover is you can't turn people into whatever you want them to do. That
Yeah.
it doesn't work with human beings. And I
Yeah.
think that's what's weird, because it's kind of demotivational. And I say this in my talks, part of what we're trying to convince people of is, and this goes back to the freak factor, is we do have limitations. There are things that we can't do, or even that, let's not say there are things we can't do. Let's at least say there are things we can't learn to prefer, right? If preference produces performance, I think that's maybe what we're saying. I think people get upset about, I could do whatever I need to. I'm good at cocktail. Like you said, cocktail parties aren't your thing, and they're not my thing either. Someone's like, I can do decent, and I can be fun, and I can just, yeah, you can, but you don't want to, right?
Yeah.
And I can't.
And how are you going to feel when it's over?
Yeah, I can't make you want to. So I think if preference drives performance, all we want people to accept, at least, is the limitation that we can't just prefer anything, right?
Yeah.
We can't mold our preferences, and that goes back to personality, which is why I developed Amplify to help people develop their preferences. But I think that's the big mistake that people make with their beliefs about this stuff is, oh, I can change my personality. It's like, no, you're changing your behaviors. But your personality is your preferences, and you don't just change your preferences. You don't just change whether you like to be alone or you like to be with other people. You don't just change whether you're high energy or low energy. You don't just change whether you thrive doing certain kinds of things. Your example from last time of how important music is to your productivity. You didn't go, you know what, I'm going to become the kind of person who needs music in order to have a moderate amount of productivity in a day. And somebody else doesn't choose to be a person who thrives on silence. They in fact, it's probably frustrating for them because maybe they work in an office and maybe they have headphones on, but the headphones are white noise. Because it's just, geez, could everybody just shut up? Because I can't focus when I think my wife is the most productive at night, and she really just wants everybody to go to bed because she almost can't focus until everyone's asleep and everybody's quiet and the lights are out outside, and literally like this calm comes over the house, and then she's like ready to go. Sort of, if anything's happening anywhere, it seems to almost be like a distraction for her. Whereas you and I were like, can I create some distractions so I can focus? You didn't choose that preference, right?
Yep.
And you can't change it, and you shouldn't have to.
No, and I think that's you talked about selection a minute ago, and so I want to talk about that for a little bit because I do that with several of my clients, and that's a complicated process. It's an involved process, and it's an important process, and I'll simplify it for the sake of our conversation. But it's, first of all, selecting based on talent, based on, again, naturally recurring patterns of thought, feeling, behavior. We'll call them preferences, whatever else we want to use, to describe that. But it's that natural quality that's really the one that we really are after. That is, first of all, it's far more predictive than most of what we do, right? There have been a ton of studies on that. And if you try to select somebody based on a panel interview, for example, you're basically just playing American Idol. Because people look for things that are like themselves, and they go, "Oh, I interviewed this person, and they have an uncle who went to the same graduate school as me, and that's how they end up getting the job."
Well, let's think about American Idol. Simon would give somebody really direct, critical feedback. Paula Abdul would tell you looked nice, or had beautiful hair, or that she loved your outfit. and then Randy would kind of either go one way or the other, but everybody was sort of like, Simon's comfortable being a jerk and doesn't care if you like it, but he's going to tell you the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Paula wants to be your friend, but she doesn't want to hurt your feelings. Yeah,
Yeah. And if you had three judges like any of those people, no one would watch,
right.
right? Because that's what real record companies do. You know, like no one wants to watch you do your job. So, but that notion of like how organizations select those. So first of all, it's more predictive, and ultimately the whole job of, and if you've got HR professionals who are listening to this podcast, your whole job in terms of selecting people to join the organization to perform well is to try to make the process of hiring as predictive as possible. And the best way to do that is to hire people based on their natural tendencies. And so the first thing you have to do is determine, what does performance look like? How do we measure performance here? How do we know what in this particular position constitutes great performance? What are we counting? And so once you know that, then you can go, okay, so who are the best people doing it? And then we can ask them a bunch of questions and go, our best people answer these questions this way, and our people who aren't so great at it answer a different way. And so now I know I want to hire more like my best. I want to hire more people who go, yeah, I wake up every day and I do Excel, and that's soul fulfilling for me, right? Versus the people who do Excel and they can be decent at it. They're not, it's not like they're bad, but they don't live for Excel. And so, okay, no problem. You can keep doing this job if you want to. But what we really want to try to hire for is people who wake up every morning thinking about it, who wake up every morning going, this is my dream. And
Yeah, I
so
had.
what questions do we craft? And then how can that be part of a process where we're bringing people in and we're saying, you know what, you answer these questions in a way that says, this is your life. This is what you want to be like. This is your A, B, and C, like we talked about earlier. You are a German Shepherd or you are a Chihuahua. And that's awesome. That's exactly what we're looking for. And oh, by the way, and this is a different way of looking at it, but one of the things I think that organizations could do a better job of is thinking to themselves, you know what, we're doing you a favor by not hiring you into this position because you won't like it, right? So a long time ago in a former career, I coached college soccer 25 years ago, right? And one of the things that I ended up being pretty good at was the recruiting part of it. And so, but part of the reason why was because I was super upfront with what we were doing as a program and what our goals were and how we were going to be. And I said, listen, in essence, it boiled down to this. We're going to be God, your family, school, soccer in that order. And that doesn't mean that we're going to be any less competitive. It doesn't mean that we're going to be any less good. We're still going to be a nationally competitive, nationally ranked soccer program. But that's the order in which we do it. And so if you get those things out of order, then you're probably going to have a problem in this program. And if that's not what you want to pursue in terms of your undergraduate experience, if that's not the kind of environment that you want to be around, if that's not the people that you want to have in your life and make core friendships with that are going to last, like yours and mine, 30 plus years, then don't come here. You won't like it. I said those exact words to, I can't tell you how many 18, 19-year-old young men. And I can't tell you how many times that some of those people never talked to me again because that wasn't what they wanted. But I felt like I was doing them a favor. And I was doing us a favor because I was like, you know what? I'm creating a filter that says, this is the kind of person who will thrive here. This is the kind of person who will perform well here. And we had great soccer players and we had great all these other things that we were doing also because that was what we were selecting for. And organizations who do it well do the exact same thing. They say, this is what we're about. Here's what we're measuring. Here's what our performance metrics are. If you're the kind of person who thrives in that environment, if you're the kind of person who prefers that environment, then come here. You will love it. And we will love you. And that's going to be a win for everybody, including our customers, our stakeholders, whoever's going to benefit from our product or our service. But if you don't do that, if you don't want that, steer clear. And let me do you the favor of telling you, hey, thank you for your interest, but this is not a good fit for you. You'll find a much better fit and a much more fulfilling career and much more reward in what you're doing, working elsewhere, because that's not who we are. And so organizations need to define themselves well in that regard, and they need to find their positions, their roles, their responsibilities well in that regard also, because the less they do that, and again, the more narrow you can be, ironically, the better it is. The less they do that, the less prepared they are to pick the right people and therefore to perform better.
Yeah, I think you said something there that there's a philosophy shift there. You ran through a bunch of things they need to do, and one of them is you need to know what your highest performers look like. one of the most common things we do in an organization is exit interviews. Steve leaves, and we wonder why Steve didn't want to stay. And maybe Steve was at least a decent performer. So Steve leaves, but we don't even ask him why he was a decent performer or ask him what he liked about the job. We're like, why'd you leave? What was wrong? What didn't you like about it? Did you get more money? What could we have done differently? Now, first of all, Steve's very unlikely to be honest about any of those things, but let's forget that. What we rarely do is go, who are our top 5 performers in this role? And do they share any commonalities? Do they share any preferences? Do they share a background? Do they share some kind of education? Do they share some kind of personality style? What are the characteristics of our highest performers? Because you can't match what does a high performer in this situation look like. And then we also have all sorts of false beliefs about it. So I love it. I watch a ton of sports. And one of the things I love when someone's winning a championship or something, they're like, this person just loves to win, man. They're just competitive. As though every other person who's a professional athlete isn't also a person who loves to win and massively competitive, which is how they ended up at the pinnacle of sports. Like, yeah, but that isn't what separates them. And then they'll be like, they want it more or something like that. I'm like, I don't know if that's really the difference. You know, you'd have to look at it, right?
Yeah.
I think sometimes the difference isn't wanting it more. It's that somebody like Jerry Rice from the 49ers was willing to put in work that other people weren't. Like some people, the season gets over, they work pretty hard and they're pretty talented, but now it's time to relax, put on some weight, play some video games. Jerry Rice, the day after the Super Bowl, is planning his off-season workout. He's working on some new thing. Kobe Bryant was the same. He's immediately in the gym. He's immediately trying to change some part of his game. He's immediately trying to get back to the top or get to the top again, whatever it happens to be. So now it's, does somebody love it enough to spend time on it when they don't have to, when no one would expect them to, when it's the off season, when it's not something. I heard on a podcast recently that during one of the the lead up to one of the Olympics, all the guys on the Olympic team went out and partied one night during the training period for the Olympics. And when they came back to the hotel at like 4:30 in the morning, Kobe Bryant was leaving for his workout. And it was like a massive wake-up call for all of them. And they basically stopped partying late into the night and started getting up early in the morning because they saw that it wasn't the mindset, it was the behavior of, but also what about that person makes them want to do it. I mean, I've been doing 75 hard for the last 38 days or whatever, I guess, and halfway through. And my wife's like, I'm so proud of you. You're doing your 2 45-minute workouts. You're drinking your gallon of water. You're reading 10 pages. You're sticking to a diet. You're not cheating, cheat meals, and you're not having alcohol. And for me, that's not so much difficult as it is sort of a lot of the things I would be doing anyway. That isn't me fighting myself every day, right? That's me doing generally the kinds of things I want to do. And I want to go for that walk. I get a little antsy when I'm sitting around. I like a certain amount of structure. I enjoy reading and I enjoy learning. Remember, input is in one of my top 5. So I think the real issue, and you said it before, preference leads to performance. How can you find people who genuinely want to do the thing that has to be done, right? And I think one of the big things, and this goes back to positive psychology, which we talked about last time, instead of what's wrong with people that they don't want to work, what's wrong with people that they're low performers, what's wrong with us that people are trying to leave, I think one of the things that organizations should do more of, to your point, is talk to the people who are succeeding and find out what it is about them that makes them successful in this area, that makes them want to do what has to be done. And also talk to your long-term happy people who are productive and find out why they stay. Because I think that's a whole other thing. I think you would know it better than me because you were a literature English major, but there's that quote from Tolstoy, you know, that happy families are happy in a couple different ways, but unhappy families are unhappy in about a million different ways that you can't. and I don't know exactly how it comes across, but that's what it is with people. Oh, this person wanted to get paid more. This person didn't like the benefits. This person didn't like the schedule. Meanwhile, you've got somebody who's been working there 25 years and is doing amazing, and you're not asking them, how do we find more people like you? What are
Mm-hmm.
you like? But also, what do you like about working here? Because whatever those other people don't like, we're not bad for everyone. If you can't keep anyone, that's a different problem.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's another major mindset shift that goes to positive psychology. Are we asking enough as an organization what's working and how do we build on it, instead of what's broken and how do we fix it? So this goes even out of weakness fixing on an individual level. Are we as an organization only trying to fix our organizational weaknesses, or are we asking enough questions about our strengths? Are we asking enough questions? Because one of my big clients is a mining company and they work 24/7. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
place runs 24/7. That you get paid extra for working a holiday, but everybody, work goes on holidays, work goes on the weekends, work goes at night. It's a 24/7 operation. And these people work 12-hour shifts overnight. They work 12-hour shifts during the day, and they go back and forth between day and night. You don't just have a night shift or a day shift. You'll work some days, then you'll work some nights, then you'll work some days, then you work some nights. And I've asked 50 people at least over the years, because it sounds terrible to me, do you ever wish you could just get on days? And they'll go, oh, no, because when you got your day off during the day on like a Tuesday, you can get all sorts of stuff done when no one else is out, no one else is doing it. You can run errands. You don't need to take a day off from work to go to a doctor's appointment. You can take your kids to school. You can get your car fixed. You can go to the grocery store. You can do all sorts of stuff on a Tuesday morning that otherwise you'd have to take off of work to do, or you'd have to try to do it on a Saturday when everyone else is shopping, everybody else is trying to get their tire repaired, everybody else is trying to get a haircut. So instead of saying, sure, it's hard to keep people because the schedule is terrible, you're like, well, I got somebody who's worked here for 35 years and loves their job and would refuse to go on days. So what is that person about? What has that person learned? What is that person's lifestyle? And how do I find more people like that? So I think, that's kind of a third piece we've gotten to. Me fixing my own weaknesses doesn't work great and
Mm-hmm.
doesn't lead to higher performance. You gave the example last time of trying to write with your opposite hand, right? Organizations trying to fix employee weaknesses doesn't work because we don't change people's preferences. We can change what they can do, but we're not going to change their preferences. And I love what you said, preferences drives performance. You could argue that, but we're saying we believe it does, right? But then a bigger thing is, as an organization, are we asking ourselves often enough what is working and how do we build on it? Or are we constantly asking what's wrong and how do we fix it? And I think for most organizations, the answer is we're asking what's wrong and how do we fix it? And when that comes to policies and personnel and things like that, then I think we miss the high performers. We miss what we have that's working and that is good and attracts a certain kind of person and makes a certain kind of person successful. And so I think that's a bigger picture sort of philosophy thing as well, that organizations have unique strengths and weaknesses and are attractive to certain kinds of people and unattractive to certain other kinds of people. And we can't necessarily be an organization that everyone's going to love. And maybe that's that mistake again. We should be well balanced and we should be well rounded and we should be a place that anyone could be successful at. And that's never going to be true as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I think there's a couple of things that are important in that too. The downstream ramifications of that, like you talked about cross training before, and cross training is a super important function in a lot of organizations, but it's less successful if you don't have enough people who are wired similarly and who prefer the same kinds of things. So if you're trying to get somebody to cross over from ABC to XYZ, that cross training effort is not going to be very successful. But if you've got a bunch of people who are ABC and they all wake up and love Excel, then cross-training them on some other aspect that's similar to Excel or some other thing that Excel does that they don't have to use every day, but somebody else does, is going to be an easy thing. It's going to be a good thing. And so it makes the rest of what you have to do better. It makes the rest of what you have to do easier if you get the stuff on the front end right. And again, organizations aren't thinking that way because they're not thinking about it in terms of how do we get the right people for the right job? But also, I think there's an element to this, and we're probably gonna have this conversation another time. But the I think there's a big difference, and you talk about this with Stan and Pink Goldfish, and this whole thing. Like, but one of my favorite quotes of all time, I don't even know if it's a quote. I might have come up with this one on my own, but I'm not for everybody.
Mm.
I'm not for everybody. Not everybody wants to work with me. I couldn't work in just any organization. In fact, I don't work in an organization at all because I work for myself. But certain clients don't even like me because I'm too direct for them, or because of whatever. And but I think part of that, and like you dig it a little deeper, is the difference between an internal frame of reference and an external frame of reference. And I think part of the permission that we have to be giving, we used that term last time, but part of the permission we have to be giving one another, and also organizations have to start giving themselves, is to think, you know what, I'm going to worry less about whoever the stakeholder or the customer is. And I'm going to define, how do we want to show up in a marketplace? Because the market does get to decide what it wants from you. Right. But if you need to differentiate yourself, the best way to do that is to create an environment where you've got people who are crazy about what you're doing and so excited that they're going to make it amazing that people can't help but buy it. People can't help but subscribe to it, right? That it's magnetic for the right kinds of people and for the people that you end up wanting. Now, we do that in the other way around sometimes, and we think, oh, well, who's our target audience and how do we serve them and how do we whatever? And we're constantly chasing around, like this ideal avatar kind of thing, which to me seems like an exercise in futility 90% of the time, because those customer preferences might change and that market might shift and technology might advance. And so it's not like it's a totally worthless exercise, but you have to keep doing it all the time in order to keep up. Instead of saying, you know what, recognizing that there's a need in the marketplace and recognizing this is the need that we typically fill, how do we get really crazy about it? How do we get differentiated about it in a way that says we are after this? And if you want to be after this too, or if you want this provided to you, then we are your people, because we are nuts about this. We think about it all the time, and we hire people who think about it all the time.
Well,
and we're continuing to make it better. And we always want to talk, we want to be industry leaders. Well, what's the best way to be an industry leader? Get a bunch of people around who all they care about is that thing.
Well, and sometimes you won't know, and Apple's proven this over and over, you won't know if anybody wants it until you do that thing that you're excited about, or you're nuts about, or you're obsessed about, or whatever it happens to be. Sometimes it is the reverse. It isn't a focus group. It isn't, you couldn't know ahead of time. It's your company is passionate about something. The people that you brought together are all weird in the same way. And then you over time discover your people. You couldn't have found them ahead of time, and you couldn't even have known until you created it. It was perfect what you said. You're not for everyone. That was the last episode, was about a book called Subpar Parks, which was about how every national park has at least one star review. And the quote that I used from her, which was perfect, and I need to add it to my speeches now because I used some of the reviews that she talks about, and I've explained it, but she has a perfect quote. She says, if the best the planet has to offer isn't enough to make everyone happy, then what hope do you have?
Yeah.
Right. And so I think we believe that people are endlessly sort of interchangeable and unfortunately expendable, but then we also believe that somehow our company can make everyone happy, can make everyone satisfied, can make everybody pleased and be 5 stars for everyone. And that's not realistic either. All right. We got a couple of things we need to do. I always do a shoe of the week. I forgot to do it last time, and I was thinking, what do I do today? Because I got Stosh on, and I just got some brand new Nikes, but they're skating shoes. Now, Nike is not known for their skating shoes. That's more of a Vans, but these are social media ad. They know I like pink shoes. These are the SB, stands for skateboarding, Pogo Plus. They're also a unisex shoe, which was interesting. So I ordered it in my size, but they didn't have the sizing clear on there. So it came in the ladies 12.5, which is like a men's 11. So I needed the size they were listing was ladies. So these are Nike. And the reason I picked this one for today is because these are relatively recent shoes, but also because you used to get rad, Stosh, when you were in when you were in high school, when you were in grade school. So I thought a skateboarding shoe was just the thing. And talk about uh, an activity that had some people who didn't like it, right? And talk about an activity that attracted a certain kind of person. It was almost a personality, and certainly had a lot of people who, when you say I'm not for everyone, skateboarding was definitely something that polarized people. I mean, cities have entire ways of building their outdoor spaces now to keep skateboarders from using certain
Yeah.
surfaces, and to make it difficult for skateboarders. And all sorts of laws were created. So I thought that was a fun pink shoe to show for the day, but also taps into Stosh's skateboarding history.
Yeah. Well, and what's awesome about that too is that like that's an illustration of the exact same principle that we want in our organizations, right? Because we pick our friends like that. We pick our friends based on the things we have in common, based on the things that we're both weird about. And organizations just need to embrace the same principle. That's kind of what it boils down to.
I think that's an interesting metaphor. We've bounced around dogs and trees and machines, but I think all the way back to the beginning of what you said, like, are you willing to accept certain things from work and at work that you wouldn't accept in other places? I think family's not the ideal metaphor for that, because at some point, you say I'm going to love my kids even if it's difficult, or
Mm-hmm.
you can decide to get divorced, or you can decide I'm going to stick with this person even when it gets tough. But I do think friendship is a good metaphor, because basically saying, why would I try to force myself to hang out with somebody when it isn't the right fit, when it doesn't make sense, when we don't like the same things? That's
Mm-hmm.
not how friendships work. So I think a lot of companies use the family metaphor inappropriately, because also
Mm.
people have had terrible families, abusive families, broken families, difficult families. So to say we're like a family means no, we're like a good family, and you may not have had that experience, so you don't really know even what the metaphor is. But saying, work should be like friendship. You choose it voluntarily. You do it because there's a connection. You end it when there isn't a connection, or when it stops making sense. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's maybe an interesting way to kind of tie that up a little bit. So we've got our shoe, the SB Pogo Plus. We've got our shoe, but also I've been wearing in the summer my Liquid Death Mountain Water hat. That's I think a bear trap on there. So I've been committed to it, but I got to crack open. So as we did before, we are still not sponsored by Liquid Death Mountain Water.
My
Um,
son's a massive Liquid Death fan.
mm,
They also spell. Have you seen their shirts that spell liquid wrong?
oh, I haven't seen
Yeah,
that.
they spell liquid
Imperfection.
and death incorrectly on their shirts.
You think on purpose?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, because it's not wrong on the can. So you say they have. Oh, I have to get it. So that's a
Yeah.
shirt. Is it just one of the shirts, or all their shirts are
I don't know
misspelled?
if it's all their shirts, but my son has a shirt that's by Liquid Death, and it's like LIKWID or something like
Oh,
that.
okay, okay,
And
not
then
like missing the U, or
oh,
not,
no,
but
no,
very
no, and then like
clearly.
death is like DETH or something. Like it's
Okay,
very on purpose,
I
and
think
it's
what
and
your
it's
son
written
did
in
was he
hand.
bought a cheap ripoff of liquid. He bought the Prada
Right?
PRADDAU.
No, no, this is a
You know,
legit product that
the
they have.
the
Yeah.
3L Rolex, the double X Rolex. Okay. So still not sponsored by Liquid Death. Also, just got back from a trip to Utah, and I've flown more than 1.25 million miles on Delta Airlines. I'm a Diamond Medallion member with them. I have the credit card. I'm all in with Delta. Not sponsored by Delta either. Anybody this week, Stosh, that you're not sponsored by after our little last time you were not sponsored by Spotify.
Right.
Do you
Today
want to
I'm
keep
not
that one, or you?
sponsored. I'm not sponsored by New Era.
Mm,
So I wear a hat almost every day.
yeah,
I almost always wear fitted hats, and
yeah.
I love the New Era 3930 hat. It's large, extra large. It's like a mildly flex fit hat. It fits me
Hmm.
perfectly because I have
Hmm.
a large head size. And so I buy a lot of those hats and I enjoy them quite a bit, but I'm not sponsored by New Era.
I think we'll do an episode about how jobs should be like clothes, right? If your head is big, you got to find a hat that fits. You don't go, "What's wrong with me? How do I shrink my head?" Right?
Yeah.
What's and my
I
head
mean,
is
like, I'm
tiny,
laughing because it sounds so absurd, but that's exactly what we do
but
in
that's what we do with other
organizations.
stuff, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And sometimes if we say this shirt doesn't fit, we say, "Well, that's because I've gotten too fat or whatever."
Right.
But a lot of times there's nothing you physically could do. And even that, in the meantime, you still need clothes that fit. Like, okay, fine. But for now, get a shirt that you can, that buttons or that you can
Mm-hmm.
tuck in.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm the opposite. I have a very tiny head. So what your exact head size, like when it's the exact number, like 7 and 4,
Yeah. Typically I'd wear like a 7 5/8 hat.
7 and 5/8. Okay, so that's not
Yeah.
terrible, but that's yeah. I think they
Yeah.
kind
But
of
I'm
max
five
out
nine.
around. They max out at like 7 and 7/8 or something like that, or do they go all the way up to like?
I've seen 8,
Yeah,
but
you're pretty close. Yeah, with
yeah.
a snap, like are you like on the last or the second to last snap when it's a snapback hat?
Yeah. It's usually like maybe 3 snaps.
Yeah. I'm the opposite. Like I can keep it where they're all snapped, right? Where there's no extra holes, right?
Oh
Or
yeah.
actually have to overlap a tiny bit. Like I'm a 7 and 1/8 or something like that.
Yeah.
Like
No,
I'm a
no.
very, very tiny head kind of person. I love it. New Era hats. Now I don't recognize that it's a C. Almost makes me feel like the Chicago Cubs or something, but not a hat that
Yeah.
I've
So
seen.
this
So
is
what is it?
the Chicago Cubs City Connect hat. So
Which is
it's
like
got the little,
the flag, the star in the
yeah, it's
flag.
the little stars from the Chicago
Okay.
flag, and on the back of it, it says Wrigleyville. So, because
Okay.
that's what the jersey says, Wrigleyville across the
Yeah.
front.
Yeah.
So, and then like they
Nice.
got a bunch of stuff that talks about the neighborhood or whatever. My daughter used to live in Wrigleyville, so
So Stosh is not sponsored by New Era. The former, I grew up in Milwaukee. The former Brewers head coach is now the head coach of the Chicago Cubs. And growing up, because WGN would kind of broadcast widely, we grew up listening to a lot of Chicago Cubs games back when they were terrible for a very, very long time. So let's wrap up with Stosh. Tell us the quote again from the Widget book. And then
yeah,
tell us just a little bit more about that book. If somebody's interested in that book, give us the author's name again and tell us just a little bit more about that as we wrap up.
yeah, for sure. So I've got the book right here. It's called Widgets. It's by Rodd Wagner. His name is spelled just like it sounds, last name, but Rodd is with 2 D's.
Rodd with 2 D's. Okay.
Yep. And so the quote is, "Your people are not your greatest asset. They're not yours, and they're not assets." And so the subtitle of the book is the new rules for managing your employees as if they're real people. And so in the book, he just kind of goes through like, these are the rules for. It's kind of a riff on First Break All the Rules, that was kind of the original Gallup management book. But he does acknowledge some things that in general engagement has acknowledged in the past. So for example, he talks about, actually, I'm going to look and make sure I get it exactly right. He calls it make money a non-issue. Right. So like a lot of times organizational consulting groups will ignore the fact that people want to be paid for their jobs because there's not a lot of research that says that it's a driver of engagement. And so Rodd is kind of making the argument, and I'm going to loosely say this, but like Rodd is making the argument like, look, pay matters. So let's just make it a non-issue. Let's pay people the way they ought to be paid for the job that they're doing. And let's not make that a concern. And then we can, once we take that off the table and not make that a big, talking point at every performance review and all the other things that happen in organizations that people get all stressed and anxious at the end of the year because these are the conversations they have to have. Let's just make that a non-issue so that we can focus on things that are going to be much more productive for ourselves and for the people that we bring into our organization.
Yeah. I love it. Rodd Wagner Widgets. I'm going to have to check that out. And also, you said he wrote a book called 12. Is that based on the Q12, those 12 questions that Gallup asked that kind of separates the high performers from the low performers? Like I have somebody who talks to me about my progress at work, and I have the equipment and resources I need to do my job and things like that.
Yeah, so that book was the kind of the follow-up to First Break All the Rules, written several years later by Rodd and also by, I think, a guy named Jim Harder, who was a workplace consultant statistician at Gallup. But they actually tell a lot of stories in that book about top performing managers and organizations in each one of those areas. So that's a book worth picking up as well. But Widgets kind of expands on some of that research and some of that thinking in Rodd's kind of post-Gallup life, if you'd like to call it that, and it's definitely worth a read.
All right, so let's wrap it up. If you have any comments or questions, we'd love to hear it. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, especially focused on management this week. We kind of focused more on managing others than sort of managing yourself, although certainly those are connected. So if you have any questions for Stosh, you have any questions for me, we'd love to hear it. Also, if you found any mistakes or you found any imperfections on the podcast, we'd love to hear it. Check out the book Widgets by Rodd Wagner. And we started with a question. Nice. Stosh has shown it again. We started with a question, so maybe we'll end with one that's related. Basically, as you go through your day and your week at work, I think a good question is, am I treating my people like they are machines, right? Am I treating my people like they are widgets, like they are parts, like they are interchangeable things? Or am I treating them like humans? Because humans are fundamentally different, and then we have to adjust to specifically the limitations that people have that make them different from the way the machines work. So thanks for joining us for this episode of the Imperfectionist Podcast. Stosh will definitely be back in the future. His last name is Walsh. We've addressed that many times. So thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Imperfectionist Podcast.